I'm going to be reviewing State of Decay 2 in 2023. Is the game still worth buying, and more importantly, spending your time on? Let's go ahead and get into it. State of Decay 2 is a open world zombie survival game where you are one of the lucky few who survived the zombie apocalypse and the collapse of society, only to be faced with a new, mutated version of the virus called the Blood Plague. It is your job to defeat the new threat by destroying the plague hearts, but it's a lot easier said than done. But let's go ahead and talk about the things I like about this game. The first thing I like about this game is how challenging it could be on harder difficulties, especially in the early game. Combat in the beginning of the playthrough is extremely dangerous, and it's better to stealth kill zombies before directly confronting them or avoiding them if possible. You could be injured in combat, limiting your max health and stamina, temporarily nerfing your character until they are healed at an infirmary, or using medkits, which are extremely rare on harder difficulties. Oh, and did I mention permadeath is a thing? If you lose a survivor, they are dead permanently. They're gone. And if that wasn't enough, everyone in your community will become depressed, causing arguments to break out, lowering your morale even more in your community. But let's move on to the next thing I like, which is the gameplay. It could be broken down into 3 different categories: looting, combat, and base management. So let's talk about looting. Looting is a key part of this game that allows you to get anything from rucksacks of supplies for your base to guns, ammo, food, medicine, etc. Depending on where you loot determines what type of loot you're gonna get from that area. For example, if you loot a restaurant, you will find food. And if you loot a military outpost, you will find guns and ammo. So let's move on to the next part of the gameplay that I want to talk about, which is the combat. The combat in the beginning of the game is pretty straightforward and basic. You button mash until you knock over a zombie and then execute them. Slowly but surely, you'll level up your combat skill, allowing you to specialize your combat, giving you extra abilities to either knock down a zombie into an instant execution, or crippling a zombie, allowing you to execute them, and it's just really useful until you max out your specialization where you're able to straight up execute zombies easily, and it's just really satisfying, slowly growing your character and your community, making them stronger. But let's move on to the last bit of gameplay, which is base management. In the early game, your community will barely have any supplies, and most of the time in the early game, you'll be gathering resources to keep your base from falling apart, and getting food in your survivor's belly so they don't starve, and gathering medicine so your survivors don't get sick. But eventually, your base will be self-sufficient for just long enough for you to go a little farther out and do a bunch of really cool things. And eventually, you could optimize your base to the point where you could barely deal with it at times, and it could become self-sufficient, which is really fun. I really enjoy just building bases and trying to optimize them where I just don't have to deal with them, or I could craft my own supplies and not have to worry about going out and looting as much. There are 2 things I want to talk about before moving on to the things I dislike about this game. The first is the graphics. They look really nice, especially on PC, and the game just pops. Now, the game does have some optimization problems, but I'll talk about that in a second. The last thing I want to talk about is there's a lot of content in this game. Now, I just have over 200 hours in this game, and there's 4 different storylines you could do after you beat all the plague hearts. In this game, you could promote a leader, and your leader could be one of 4 different types of leaders. There's the sheriff, the warlord, the trader, and the builder. After you complete one of these storylines, you beat the game, and you could move your community to another map. There are 5 different maps, so at least you could do 5 different playthroughs if you really wanted to. The next thing I want to talk about is Daybreak mode, which is a really fun tower defense mode that you could do with friends, where there's different waves of zombies coming to your base, and you have to protect a person inside of that base. The next thing you could do is the Heartland DLC, which takes place in Trumbull Valley between State of Decay 1 and State of Decay 2. It tells you a pretty cool story and has one of the best bases in the game. But let's move on to the things I dislike about this game. The first thing I want to talk about is something I mentioned earlier. The game is poorly optimized. Without VSync capping the game at 60 frames per second, the game turns into a slideshow, dropping frames, especially during combat. If I could make a custom frame rate cap without turning on VSync, the game would look so much better and would just play so much better as well. I have several problems with the multiplayer. The first problem I have is there's just a bunch of lag when playing with friends, especially when you're fighting a bunch of zombies. You'll just get hit with these awfully timed lag spikes, and your HP will just vanish and you'll just get destroyed. The second problem I've been having a ton of connection issues. My friend joins my world, or I try to join his world, and it'll say I joined on their screen, and I'll be hit with an extra long loading screen before getting booted out. And that's happened to us a lot, or my game will straight up crash while loading. My final problem with the multiplayer is you cannot progress while in a friend's world. You can't build a base, you can't use their infirmary to heal yourself, which really sucks. This game is basically a single player game with the ability to have a friend join in and help you, and then leave and go do their own thing on their own world, and you could go help them. My final complaint about this game is it has some glitches and bugs, which could be extremely annoying. Like one time I got stuck jumping through a window and I was just floating and surrounded by zombies and I could not get out, and it ended up dying and losing my character. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up the video. Should you buy State of Decay 2 in 2023? And I think the answer is yes. This game is really fun. I would rate it a 9 out of 10. Even though I have some problems with it, it's still a blast to play and it's still being updated. They changed how play cards works, and it's just really fun to see this game still being changed and updated after being, what, 5 years old? But see you guys later.